Okay, so for the past 3 years, I was really hoping someone would take a photo of me giving that, but there's no screen here. Anyway, for the past 3 years, I've been a researcher at IT University of Copenhagen, and I've been writing a PhD dissertation about folk games, design theory, and computer games. But in addition to writing about and studying these games, I've also been making a bunch of digital games with my colleagues in Copenhagen. So there's been a bunch of games. Some of the more popular ones are a Wiimote game called Darkroom Sex Game, a party game called Button, which we showed at IGF last year. And this year we're showing a game called Johann Sebastian Joust, which you can try on the show floor Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for the PlayStation Move controller. So actually, I have a secret to share. What I really wanted to call this talk, but what kind of got vetoed, is doing ridiculous shit with technology. And so, what I want to tell you in the next 20 minutes is, why would you want to do ridiculous shit with technology? So that's really the point of this talk. And so to start with a really discrete, a really clear example, I want to do a live demonstration of a Move game that I had done with David Kaniga over here, who is also the composer of and sound designer for Proteus and Dyad. And so, David and I have been working on this really deliberately stupid installation game, and that's what I want to show you really quickly. Okay. Okay. So get in position. I'm going to come join you in a second. Actually, can you do me? When I tell you, can you press enter on this? Okay. So here's how it works. And sorry, we're going to play over here because I need space. So I hope everyone. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So here's how it works. We each have a PlayStation Move controller tied to our butts, and we're going to be all on all fours, and we're basically dogs. And we get more points the more we accelerate our controllers. But we're not allowed to touch it with our hands, so we kind of have to shake our butts around and accelerate this. Now, occasionally, some of the controllers will start flashing, and that means you're vulnerable. So if you can wrestle the person down and press one of their buttons, they lose a bunch of points. And then there's a little rest period. So you'll hear the music a little bit more calm, which we catch our breath, and then it's back at it. This will last only a minute, and the person with the most points wins. So it's pretty simple. And it's a little violent. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, go. All right, let me catch my breath for a second. You guys can sit down. Or not, whatever. All right, let's calm it down a little bit. I'm going to play the Where's My Heart soundtrack in the back for some good, more calm vibes after that. Okay. Whew. Now I'm going to give the rest of the talk out of breath, but that's good. Okay, so I want to talk a little less about the game itself, but more the design thinking and the process that went into making that really stupid, deliberately silly, and violent installation game. So this summer, my friend Joanna, pictured here, got to try some Swedish folk games in a suburb of Gothenburg. And so she sent me some photos of these games she played. You can't see it entirely well in this photo, but she has a rod tied to a string from the back of her belt. And she's not allowed to use her hands, and she's trying to knock those beer cans off. There's a whole obstacle course of these beer cans on these little shelves. And the cans are full of sand, so they're actually pretty tricky to knock down because they're quite heavy. And of course, she can't use her hands, so she's trying to, in the best time possible, run around this obstacle course and with her butt knock these things over. There was a second similar game where there was a pen tied to the string, and they were trying to insert them into this empty water bottle, which is really tricky, right, because this pen is dangling around. Anyway, so she told me about these two games, and at the time I had been making Johann Sebastian Joust for the Move controller, and immediately when I heard about this, it was like, oh, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do with this. And those are really the games that directly inspired that game you just saw there. And so I would say those two games are what I would call folk games. And here's another example, a more famous example, a game called Ninja, which I'm sure a lot of you have tried and played recently. It's like a playground game, and I won't explain the full thing, but you stand in a circle, and you each get a turn, and you're trying to slap the hands of other people who can kind of dodge with their arms. And so, okay, so what do I mean by calling all of these things folk games? Okay, so a philosopher of games, play, and sport, Henning Eichberg, who's based in Denmark, writes a lot about folk games, and he defines it, he says, they're traditional, ethnic, or indigenous sports and games. Can also include new activities like ninja, right, that are based on traditional practices. Okay, so more colloquially, I would say folk games they're simple games. So they're easy to understand for spectators, and they're easy to learn for the players. They usually don't often require equipment, and if they do, it's common equipment like a ball or a deck of playing cards or a bat. So they're equipment that everyone has around that they could use to play the game. They're often spread by word of mouth, and that's partly because they're so easy to teach, and so they spread organically through groups of friends and through culture and so forth. And because of that, there are often house rules. So each family, each playing community, each culture usually has different ways and slightly different variations of these games. And in fact, that's why these games evolve organically over time through different cultures. So for me, I want to focus on a specific type of folk game. I'm really interested in very physical games and deliberately really silly games. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So Eichberg makes this distinction between what he calls modern sport and popular sport. And folk games would be a type of popular sport. So modern sport is kind of like professional sports that we see on TV or the Olympics or something, where it's kind of about achieving perfection or setting some sort of record. Whereas he contrasts that with popular sport, which he sees as more festive, deliberately unserious, and there's this idea that anybody can get involved. So rather than professional sports, where there's a clear distinction between spectators and the people playing the game, that in a folk game or a popular sports setting, everyone gets in and takes a turn. It's a lot messier, and the hope is that everyone will get involved, so to blur the boundary between player and spectator. And I think this dichotomy is obviously a little oversimplified, but what I like about it is it makes this nice distinction between the seriousness sometimes of sport and the unseriousness of more popular sports, folk games, and carnival games, and so forth. And what we're getting at here is folk games isn't just a genre or like a formal quality of games. It's also an attitude. It's how we approach the games, both as the players and the designers. And so for me, it's an attitude of unseriousness. Okay, so now thinking again about that Dog the Wag game I was just showing. Right? This is a game that's deliberately supposed to be really stupid. It's supposed to make the players look a little silly and enjoyable for the spectators. And specifically, I think what's going on here is this idea of subversion, right? So tying a Move controller, or really any video game controller, to your butt is just like not what you typically do with game controllers. And it's not what they were really designed for. And that's why these games, to me, are really fun. Kind of apart from the game itself, there's something fun about using this technology in deliberately stupid ways that you weren't meant to use them in that kind of way. So I do think there is a joy in subversion, so to speak. Okay, so I want to give some other examples of games I've made inspired by folk games. So here's another installation I did recently, also with sound and music by David. It's a game called Beacons of Hope. And so let me tell you the story behind the game before I tell you about the game. So I was sitting with my friend Tom and his wife this summer over beers, and they were telling me about this summer camp game that they run for these kids at a summer camp. And they get a house out in the middle of the woods, and they turn off all the lights, and it's night. So the house is pitch black. And it's maybe like 30 people in the house running around this pitch black house. 2 players are monsters. So they're crawling around the ground, and they're trying to catch all the other players who are the humans, right? And the game is called Monsters. Now, the monsters win if they can catch all the humans. The humans win, they're looking for a flashlight that has been hidden in the house by the moderator before the round. If they can find the flashlight and shine it at the monsters, they win. And it's a simple game, but the idea is, I don't know if you guys have ever tried this, but playing in the dark is actually just really fun in and of itself. And so immediately, again, when I heard this, I was like, oh man, I know exactly what I want to do with this idea. So I made this installation game. It's played in an auditorium, maybe about this size. And there are about 20 players. 2 players are monsters, like in the Monsters game. However, they carry around Move controllers, and if they're still or slow, no light. So the room remains completely pitch black. However, if they ever move a little bit, say to reach out and grab one of the human players, it lights up red quickly. So suddenly out of the darkness, whoa, red light, and then it goes black again. Now the human players are looking for 3 Move controllers, additional Move controllers that have been hidden around the room. And there are these beacons of hope, these torches that you're trying to find. So the humans, their goal is before time is up, before the 10 minutes, they're trying to find all 3 of them and light them up at the same time, which vanquishes the monsters. So again, a game that was directly inspired by this type of folk game, camp game, playground game. Again, finally, this game, Johann Sebastian Joust, which is a little bit more maybe accessible than the other 2 games. It was also directly inspired by a number of folk games. One of them, which doesn't even have a name, Nils, Bernie, and I, a few years ago, were hanging out in Christiania, which is an area of Copenhagen. And we found this piece of playground equipment, and we just started messing around, and eventually we improvised a really simple game where you start and you slowly walk towards each other, balancing on the rope, and you're trying to push each other off, and the first player to hit the ground loses. So even if you fall off, you want to fall off after the other person. And of course, it's even better if you can make it to the other side and without falling off and push the other guy. So here, Nils has made it to the other side, and I have to crawl under the rope in shame. I've just been roped. Okay, here's another example. I'm going to show you a quick video, and I'm actually going to switch over to VLC. Okay, it's a game called Listelanse, which means sneaky lance in Danish. And we each are blindfolded so we can't see, and we have a kitchen spoon. This is a great party game, by the way, if you ever want to try this. Especially good if you're drunk. Okay, so we have to move in slow motion is the thing. And the first player to hit the other, see, I just won there. The first player to hit the other wins. And it's the crowd around you watching is the thing that enforces that you're going slow enough. And so the basic insight with this game is that moving in slow motion feels super badass, but looks ridiculous. Like you look like an idiot. So the spectators are having fun, you're having fun, and moving in slow motion, no matter what game you're playing, is fucking sweet. And that's really the core idea that inspired Joust, which is like, man, let's make a game where we just fucking move in slow motion. So again, like pulled directly from a folk game. So think a game like Joust, the rhetoric and the ideology around the game is very different than the type of rhetoric you hear in like AAA game marketing around all these new motion control devices like the Kinect, like the Wii, like the Move. So I'm going to pick on the Move since I use a commercial. I think this takes the promise of this technology very seriously. It's very optimistic about the capabilities of these devices, and promising these games that are really immersive, where you really feel like you're in this fictional world doing these crazy things with this technology. But I think often the reality is that these technologies are super, super limited. I don't know how much you guys have been able to play around with these gesture recognition or motion control technologies. There's really a lot of technological limitations. And despite all these promises and optimism, like all these technologies just kind of suck, is the reality. And to me, that's awesome. Like it's precisely because these technologies suck, which makes them really interesting and really fun. So I think part of the key here is to embrace these technological limitations rather than to try to fight them, to try to fight the latency problems of doing gesture recognition and make complicated algorithms to deal with these problems. So, for example, a game like Joust, so we have an accelerometer, right? What can an accelerometer do? Well, it can detect acceleration. Okay, so let's just make a game about accelerating your controller, or in this case, not accelerating your controller, right? And so that's, of course, the algorithm's slightly more complicated than that, but the idea here is let's just do exactly what this technology does, so we don't really have to fight or pretend that this technology can do something more than what it's really doing. I think this is especially valuable insight if you're an indie, right? So if you're Ubisoft and you can throw like tons of money and tons of top talent into making complicated algorithms to get, for example, 4 people working, or the Kinect tracking 4 people, which is kind of a miracle, right? If you can't do that, you can't throw that type of money at it because you're just a solo indie or you're in a small studio. I think it's often more effective and more productive to offload some of that work onto the players. So this is almost kind of like the lazy man's approach to doing motion control design. So there's no like camera in Joust that makes sure that you all stand in a circle or something, or that you're not pushing each other or kicking each other or whatever, right? That's actually up to the players themselves to enforce those rules. The only thing that Joust uses is this kind of toy that detects whether it's moved too much or not. And this isn't that new. We've all been enforcing rules when we play board games and sports and playground games for centuries, right? So this is something we're used to. And so the design trick here becomes making the players think it's fun to improvise the rules, to enforce the rules, to add new rules, and to sell them on this idea that, hey, we're not going to expect the computer to do everything for us. We're going to enjoy enforcing some of these rules as well. And so the term I refer to in my research is this idea of deputizing the player to modify the rules themselves. And I think in a lot of my installation pieces and the types of motion control games I'm interested in, there's an aesthetic of imperfection here. So that these games are deliberately messy, the technology is imperfect, and really embracing that aesthetic. So this philosopher, Eichberg, I was talking before, has a really nice quote on this. He's writing about folk games here. He writes, "The grotesque body displays what is imperfect in human form. The fool and the carnival are images of things going wrong in life. All this gives birth to laughter, which is thus linked to a deep recognition of human failure and blurs the edges between success and failure that are sharpened by the modern culture of perfection." And I think that's really exactly summarizes this idea of laughter and imperfection, what I'm personally going for when I'm making these motion control games. And so the idea here is that, like, to me, motion control is the slapstick comedy of computer games. And yeah, here's some people playing one of our Wiimote games at our Killscreen GDC party last year. And, right, the idea is playing the fool. So these games are an excuse, just an alibi for the players to make themselves look like assholes and for everyone in the room to enjoy a laugh at the player's expense, right? Now, a game like Dog the Wag or Beacons of Hope is a pretty niche installation game. It's a little intense, right? So a more accessible game like Joust still has elements of this playing the fool, right? So Joust looks deliberately silly. You're kind of waltzing around in slow motion. So the way Joust works is you have a move controller in your hand, and if you ever move it too much, you're out, and you want to be the last player remaining. Now, of course, your opponents are going to try to hit your hand or hit your controller to make you out. So you're all fully revolving around each other, trying to defend your controller from the other players, and also trying to hit them to make them out. And so Joust is a little bit more sport-like than some of the other installations I was talking about, but it has that nice element of looking ridiculous, acting theatrically. And I think in Joust, it's that nice mix between competitive sport and playing the fool that gives it this nice feeling, this nice compromise between the two. And I think this idea of playing the fool has actually already been used really successfully in a number of commercial games. So here's my absolute favorite Wii game, WarioWare Smooth Moves. And this is a game that tells you to put the Wiimote in all sorts of crazy positions, like do the Mohawk pose, do the elephant pose. And the key is there's a bunch of micro games. So these like 5-second games, and you just play a bunch of them in a row. And in a way, that's genius, because even if the game can't detect your input correctly, it doesn't even matter, because the game is over in 5 seconds, and you have no idea what the hell just happened. And so the point of that game isn't to like really win or play well with your controller. It's to look like an asshole, like with this controller on your head, and to give everyone a laugh. So I think this is a really perfect example of that. And to me, it's not surprising that this is the best game on the Nintendo Wii, right? A more recent example of this that I love is the new game for the Vita called Frobisher Says. It's by Richard Hogg and a small studio in England called Honey Slug. And this game, like WarioWare, uses a bunch of micro games, and it tries to use all the different capabilities of the Vita controller, the camera, the buttons, the two screens, and so forth and so on. Here's a picture of some people playing it. My favorite example is a micro game called Look Away. And so the Vita tells you to look away, and you have to like look away while you're playing this. And if the camera ever detects the whites of your eyeballs, you lose. So you really do have to look away. And of course, the game is trying to tempt you into looking at it with all sorts of ridiculous subliminal images that it's showing. And so again, that's a really nice comedic example of using this Vita technology, I'm sure in a way that the people who invented it never thought of anyone using it, right? And of course, another really great example is an iPad game called Fingal. It's like Twister for your fingers, and that's also an IGF finalist this year that I'm sure you'll be able to try on the show floor. Again, deliberately really silly, physical, simple, and humorous. It's a nice example. So speaking of iOS, I think smartphones and smartphone technology in general is a really promising platform for this type of stuff, right? We're all walking around, well, not all of us, but many of us are walking around every day with accelerometers and music playing devices in our pockets. And so it'd be really easy to bust out one of these games at a party, in the park, at a family reunion. So me and the chums at Die Gute Fabrik we plan to start making a series of Joust-like physical games for smartphones that we're tentatively calling Spielplatz, which means playground in German. And so then, here's kind of a fun illustration of us playing these types of games with smartphones. And again, I think these technologies are becoming more and more prevalent. And so I do think you're going to start to see more of these types of physical games using these technologies, which is really exciting. However, the note I want to end this on is to be really clear, the idea here is not to use technology to improve games. I think you often hear a lot of rhetoric about we're augmenting the living room and we're enriching traditional play with like the beauty of technology or something. And to me, that rhetoric is a little too optimistic. And it's also a little insulting, right? Like a game like Ninja is like actually pretty perfect the way it is. It doesn't need any fucking technology to make it any better, right? So what is the point of these things? Why would we add technology? So I want to like flip the script a little bit. So I'm not interested in how technology can improve games. I'm interested in how games can improve technology, right? So I actually kind of fucking loathe this stupid little smartphone that I walk around with in my pocket every day. Like, I fucking hate this thing. And so I would love to repurpose this thing to ends more personal and more silly and more playful that makes this thing speak to my life, right? And I think these types of physical games are one way of doing that. Of course, I'm being a little glib, right? But I do think it is important to repurpose these things and give us a reason to use these things in creative ways. And yeah, that's basically it. You can go to my website. There's some of my research papers. I'm going to post my dissertation on the website soon, where I talk about some of these ideas and some of these games. And yeah, you can reach us by email or come talk to me or whatever. And that's it. Thank you. Say what? Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, apparently we have time for questions.
If they don't use the microphone, repeat the question.
Okay, and I'm supposed to repeat the question if they don't use the microphone. So I guess I could take questions. No questions. Or is there a question? Say what? Microphones in the aisles. Yeah.
So could you ever have a folk game with one player, or does the definition have to include a community?
Yeah, I think you can. So I think Solitaire would be an example of, right, like it uses common equipment. It's kind of organically evolved over the years. It's simple. I guess personally, the types of folk games I'm interested in are multiplayer and physical. But I guess if we take the broad example of folk games, yeah, I think Solitaire would be a great example. Andreas, you got to use the microphone.
How often do you guys end up breaking shit from all the different games you play?
So I'm gonna sound like an advertisement for Sony, but like, goddamn, the engineers who made these controllers are like, kudos to them. All my controllers have been dropped like over 100 times, and they're still working pretty well. Even with Button, we had, with these Xbox controllers, people wrestling over them. They held up pretty well. So yeah, I think these things are. We thought we would be breaking tons of them. But yeah, kudos to controller engineers. Thank you out there, wherever you are. But yeah.
So with the advent of Facebook and social media sort of breaking down and dictating how we interact with each other, we're getting further and further away from physical interaction.
Yeah.
How would you best want to reintroduce physically interacting with each other in a game modality using these mediums?
Using Facebook?
Not necessarily Facebook, but the
so I'm the wrong person.
Facebook
I'm not
presents.
even on Facebook. So
sure.
like, shoot, I don't know. I will say though, that's like for me, that introducing physicality back is like a big deal. So in Joust, one of the nice things is it gives adults an excuse to be able to touch each other, right? Mm-hmm. And actually, that's pretty cool. That's just not something we get to do every day. So that's certainly a goal. How we do that with like Twitter or Facebook. Shit, I have no idea. But I would love to see someone do it. Yeah. I don't know. Am I misunderstanding the question? Or?
Too long of a rant for a one question thing. So
okay.
You're fine.
And one more. Andreas.
Do you see any risk not getting improved if you make a game for iPhone, for example?
Yeah.
You have to have.
The reason I said Joust-like games, not Joust, is like iOS. We've been thinking about this a lot. Or smartphones in general require a different type of games. I think they're less physical but less aggressive games that make a lot of sense. And we have a bunch of ideas for smartphones.
I also thought about that you need, if it's a multiplayer game, you can't really do anything with it if you only buy one copy.
Yeah, but that's not true, right? You can imagine a lot of folk games that just use one device that you're passing around with a bunch of people. And that's what I mean. Like, I think those games are going to look different for the smartphone technology than they are going to for the Move, right? But they're out there. And Fingal is living proof of a really good, I wouldn't call them folk games, but a folk-ish type game that only uses one device that iOS did approve. That's really cool, right? So, I mean, these games are out there. I just think the Move games are going to look a little different than the smartphone games. But,
thanks.
Yeah.
All right, that is it for time.
Thank you.